In the 2015 offseason, the Oklahoma City Thunder, after firing their head coach Scott Brooks, decided to take a chance on an NCAA head coach with no prior NBA head coaching experience in Billy Donovan, the head coach of the Florida Gators at the time. And Billy Donovan was going to be inheriting a star-level title-contending team with the likes of Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook on his roster. Now, historically speaking, great college coaches who have had a high level of success at the collegiate level haven't always panned out when making the shift to coaching in the NBA. Guys like Rick Pitino, Mike Montgomery, John Calipari, and even former Bulls head coaches Tim Floyd and Fred Hoiberg, who were very respectable and successful college coaches, come to mind when they actually joined the NBA. That's why when Billy Donovan was hired by the Oklahoma City Thunder, as well as Fred Hoiberg, who was hired that same year by the Bulls, a lot of skepticism was shared on whether these two college coaches would be able to make the leap into the NBA, both inheriting good teams, but teams that were a bit dysfunctional. Of course, we all know what happened with Fred Hoiberg. He took a 50-win Bulls team with the exact same roster and missed the playoffs the following year, suddenly got into a rebuild after the Bulls traded away Jimmy Butler, and didn't last much longer after that. But Billy Donovan, on the other hand, surprised most fans when he took the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Western Conference Finals in his first season and all but had his team locked up going to the NBA Finals when they had a 3-1 lead over the 73-9 Golden State Warriors, until they blew the 3-1 lead and Kevin Durant bounced in the offseason to join said team that he could not beat in the Western Conference Finals. Now, I won't blame that all on Billy, because Kevin Durant played horrible in those final games of that series with his incessant isolation plays and trying to take over the game while missing shot after shot, while the Warriors capitalized on all of his mistakes. But despite all of that, Kevin Durant leaving the Thunder, Russ doing his thing and padding stats because no one else was on that team until they traded for Paul George, despite Billy Donovan always having at least one superstar on his roster, after that first season, the Thunder never made it past the first round of the playoffs. Now, to be fair, the Thunder by far exceeded expectations after they blew up the roster and traded Westbrook and Paul George. Most assumed they would be one of the worst teams in the league, but ended up finishing 5th in the West with a record of 44-28 and nearly beat the Rockets in 7 games of the first round, doing all of this with a young roster and Chris Paul. But after that season, the Oklahoma City Thunder and Billy Donovan mutually agreed to part ways and not renew his contract. And with that information, when that came out, Arturas Karnisovas, the Bulls' new executive, jumped at the chance at landing Billy Donovan and making him the head coach of their new team after they fired Jim Boylen. Well, in today's video, we're going to be discussing why the Bulls front office strong pursuit of Billy Donovan may actually enable him to keep his job longer than he probably should. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I've mentioned this in the past if you've been following my channel for a while, but when the Bulls announced they hired Billy Donovan in the 2020 offseason after the bubble, I honestly was shocked, and not really shocked in a good way. Now, this was before I started the channel, so I don't have any videos on said reaction, but at that time I was pretty active on various Bulls social pages, but I expressed my displeasure of the Bulls going after Billy Donovan over some of the other candidates that were available. First of all, Donovan was not among any of the rumored candidates at that time, so it came out of nowhere when he actually got the job. The guys that were being talked about most often as being the top candidates were Kenny Atkinson, Darvin Ham, Ime Udoka, Jamal Mosley, Wes Unseld Jr., all of which have been first-time head coaches, or would have been first-time head coaches at that time, with the exception of Kenny Atkinson, all of which are now head coaches except Kenny Atkinson, and of course Ime Udoka, who I guess is still technically a head coach but not really allowed to coach. But anyway, Billy Donovan was not one of the coaches being discussed, and among those candidates that I just mentioned, Udoka was the guy I actually wanted, which we'll talk about him in a little bit. I don't care that he would have been a first-time head coach. He was a great associate head coach with lots of experience under great head coaches. That's the guy that I wanted. And so when the Bulls hired Billy Donovan, I saw a lot of Bulls fans saying, well, he's better than Jim Boylen, which, sure, that's true, but most coaches are going to be way better than Jim Boylen. Like, is that really the standard we're going to go by for this franchise, that as long as the head coach is better than Boylen, that's all that really matters? And look, the reason I was skeptical about Donovan and the hiring, because I'll admit, it's not like I was watching every Thunder game. Like, I pretty much only watched the Thunder when the Bulls played them and when the Thunder were in the playoffs, because I always watch playoff basketball. And what I did see in those limited games was that despite the immense amount of talent Billy Donovan had on his roster, he really was not good at making in-game adjustments, and for the most part relied way too heavily on his star players just taking over the game because he really didn't know what else to do. Like the blown 3-1 lead against the Warriors is case in point. Look, I know it was the defending champion Warriors. I know they just set a record for the most regular season wins. I know they had the unanimous MVP in Steph Curry. But how do you not make adjustments to your game plan when you see that what you are doing in games 1 through 4 is no longer working and that the Warriors have started to figure out your offense? How do you not make changes to counter their adjustments when you see momentum starting to shift? You cannot just let your star player, in this instance Kevin Durant, just say, give him the ball and let him do his thing. He'll win this for us. No, it doesn't work that way, or at least if you don't see that it's working and the Warriors are hounding Kevin Durant and not giving him any good looks and Durant is struggling to even shoot above 40%, maybe start thinking of a new game plan. And it wasn't just that series. It was the series in which they lost against the Blazers, where they were in the first round, both Paul George and Russell Westbrook. I believe it was in 5 games, and they lost that series pretty badly. That should not have happened. And I don't know, honestly, it just seemed like every time we played the Thunder or watched the Thunder, their rotations were always just a little strange, or if they took a big lead and then blew said lead and started falling behind, literally no changes were made to the flow of their offense. It was always just a little baffling to me. So because of all of this, yeah, I was glad we got rid of Jim Boylen, and it was an upgrade over Boylen. I had my doubts, but I thought, well, the Bulls are a young team. At that time that we hired him anyway. They're effectively rebuilding, and one thing that Billy Donovan does well, it's what made him such a great college coach, is that he's great at getting the most out of young players, mentoring them, developing them, buying into his system, gaining that trust with his players. It's why his last season in Oklahoma City, that team exceeded expectations because Donovan is great with younger players, players who are at that college age still. And after that disaster, that was Jim Boylen, who really screwed up the growth and trust of a lot of the young players, we kind of needed that. So I figured, okay, this could be a first good step in taking this rebuilding team to the next level. But once the Bulls got to that next level, he's probably not going to be the coach for the Bulls. Well, lo and behold, the front office accelerated that rebuild when they made the trade for Vucevic, sending Wendell Carter Jr. and 2 first-round picks to Orlando, and then went on to add Lonzo, DeRozan, and Caruso in the offseason, effectively putting this team in win-now mode. Of course, the Bulls looked incredible to start the season, top of the East, even going into February, and then we all knew what happened. Guys got injured, the team fell off a cliff, and now going into this season, not a lot of offseason changes were made. Their starting point guard Lonzo Ball is still injured, and the Bulls are off to a 6-8 start. Not what the Bulls were probably expecting, even without Lonzo Ball. Now, after the Bulls' most recent loss, in which they got completely obliterated by the Denver Nuggets on their home court, and the Bulls played with little to no energy despite having 3 days off, you had an outcry of Bulls fans shouting, "Fire Billy." I believe the hashtag Fire Billy was even trending on Twitter. And it's funny because normally I would say a lot of Bulls fans, myself included, are very reactionary on a game-by-game basis. But as it relates to the firing of Billy Donovan, they're honestly probably right. They're right in that the Bulls should fire Billy Donovan, cut ties now before getting too far into the season. But the fact of the matter is, they won't, and here's why. First, let me start with why the Bulls should fire Billy Donovan, and then I'll explain why they won't. Because what I will say, it is reactionary to fire a coach after only 14 games into the season of his 3rd year, and really his 2nd season with this new look lineup. But the reason they should, despite it being early in the year, is because this spans well beyond just what we have seen so far this season. It's the fact that the history of Billy Donovan has shown, dating all the way back to when he first became head coach in the NBA, regardless of the level of talent that he has on the roster, regardless of how well things are going for his team, when things aren't going right, Billy has a very difficult time making the adjustments needed to motivate his guys, to get them back on track, whether it be in-game, over the course of a series, or over the course of a season. And this is especially the case with his star players who have big egos, getting them to change their mindset, making it abundantly clear that they need to do what's best for the betterment of the team and to actually make adjustments to their game when things aren't going well. I have absolutely no sources to back this up, but I get the sense that Billy Donovan has a really hard time telling his star players off, that he has a hard time managing egos, and it's part of the reason why you don't see proper adjustments being made when it's abundantly clear to everyone else that something needs to be done. Look, I get that the Bulls lost Lonzo Ball for the back half of the season last year. I get that Zach Lavine wasn't 100%. I get that Caruso was out. Other guys were in and out of the lineup. But the way in which the Bulls took a nosedive at the end of the season, and the manner in which they did it, where they were more or less non-competitive in a good portion of those final games, getting beaten badly by good and bad teams, where the guys just looked like they didn't even want to be there, that's on coaching. Yes, some of it is on the players. They need to hold themselves accountable on the court and play with hustle and effort on a nightly basis to actually want to win. But it's on the coach to not lose their players, to keep them motivated, to keep them inspired and trust that they actually know what they're doing. And so for this season, we're kind of seeing the same thing repeat itself so far. Not saying it's all doom and gloom. There are a lot of positive aspects that we have seen so far this year, but there is something to be said when you see yet again the lack of in-game adjustments, the lack of ball movement and focus on star players playing ISO ball in the half court, the very questionable rotations and switching lineups when things are going well on the court, the poor use of timeouts, taking them at bad times and running out of them too quickly, or not taking timeouts when it's greatly needed, or his poor choice when challenging calls that usually prove to be unsuccessful. But here's the reality of the situation. The Bulls are not going to fire Billy Donovan. And it's for a few reasons, but first and foremost is what I discussed at the top of the video and how aggressive AK was in pursuing Billy Donovan quickly after becoming available and leaving Oklahoma City. And in virtually every press conference interview in which Billy Donovan was brought up, they have continued to double down on that decision. And I have a hard time seeing this front office admitting defeat or that they made a mistake after they were so defiant in their decision to hire Billy. Second reason why the front office won't fire him: continuity. If I had $1 for every time I heard the front office use the term continuity, I could quit my day job. The Bulls have stressed continuity so much that firing Billy Donovan would be a straight contradiction to that point by throwing in a new coach right at the end of the season, or start of the season, I should say. Third, Lonzo Ball being injured. Lonzo's injury is going to save Billy's job at least for the rest of the season because they're clinging on to the fact that this looked like an incredible team when Lonzo was in the lineup, and you can't fire a coach for underperforming when you have one of your better players out of the roster. Although again, I still maintain that Lonzo being out is not the sole reason for why this team has been struggling ever since the back half of last season. And then finally, probably the most important reason for why the Bulls will not fire Billy Donovan, even if it is justified, is his contract. Billy Donovan is under contract for the rest of the season and next season, and if there's anything we know about the Bulls ownership, they hate just throwing away money, which they have done plenty of times before with coaches they had to fire early and continue to pay them while also paying whoever their current coach was. They had to do that with Tom Thibodeau, Fred Hoiberg, and Jim Boylan, who were all still owed money under contract despite being let go early. The Reinsdorfs are not going to allow that to happen again with Billy Donovan unless something catastrophic happens this year. So because of all of this, as much as Bulls fans want this, and as much as the Bulls probably should fire Billy Donovan, it's not going to happen. So we need to prepare for the fact that Billy Donovan is most certainly going to be with this team at least for the rest of the season. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.